All right, so let's get right into it. Let's talk about airworthiness. So right when we get into airworthiness, we're going to discuss what airworthiness is and why it's so important for us as pilots. So let's go ahead and talk about that, right? So when we talk about airworthiness, we're first identifying documents. And the first and foremost activity that we do when we walk up to an aircraft or we start working or identify whether or not we're going to fly this specific airplane is we want to identify documents. And there are some mnemonics that we're going to be using so that we can remember these specific documents that we need. And then when we talk about specific documents, we're also going to discuss specific inspections that need to be done in order for those documents to maintain their validity. So let's go ahead and first talk about the mnemonic of ARROW. Okay, ARROW. When we talk about ARROW, we're talking about the first one we're going to be talking about is our airworthiness certificate. And we're going to go through, and I'm going to also add the FARs, or the regulations. And this FAR is 91203, okay? And the airworthiness certificate, we're going to go a little bit deeper into. And the reason why we're going to go deeper into it is because that airworthiness certificate is good as long as the inspections are done appropriately and completely. So we'll get into those in just a minute. The next thing we're talking about is registration. Okay, and registration is good for 7 years. Okay, basically for 7 years, it is valid for 7 years. There are some other contributing factors like change of ownership and other qualifying factors. We're not going to get into those too much, but you can look that up in 91203. The next one we're going to be talking about is a radio license. And your radio license is for international only. And so we're not going to really discuss this too much, only because that's a international only. So if you're flying into Canada, Mexico, or somewhere other than the United States, you would need a radio license. But since we're not going to really get into that too much right now, we're going to move on. The next one is operations manual. Right? Operating limitations. Okay. And when we talk about operating limitations, there's some things that we're going to talk about. You're talking about approved flight manual, AFM, or the POH, Pilot Operating Handbook. That POH or AFM has to be specific to that aircraft tail number. It's specifically issued to that tail number during the manufacturing process, okay? The other things that we can have, especially with older airplanes, like a Piper Cub, right? Are you gonna find a POH for a Piper Cub that was built 100 years ago? Well, probably not, right? So you're gonna go and you're gonna look at the placards. And those placards are things like stickers or plates that are specifically identifying what is needed to be done. So the type of fuel maybe, or airspeeds for flap settings, things like that, that are going to be specifically placarded, that are going to have very specific instructions on them regarding that aircraft and the needs for that specific operation. So 91.9, if you're going to go into the regulations, we're going to go into 91.9. You can look into that a little bit further. The next thing we're talking about, or the last thing in our ARROW, is W, and that's for weight and balance. Now that weight and balance, that's specific to that tail number, okay? So specific to that tail number, okay? And it's issued by our airframe and power plant mechanic. If there's any changes that need to be done, any alterations, maybe there's new avionics that go into the system and there needs to be new components that go towards the tail of the airplane, that's where the components are gonna be, then that weight and balance is gonna have to change, right? We're going from let's say we go from a steam gauge to a glass cockpit, and a bunch of components are added to the tail section, and that specific station, right, it's gonna have to be changed. So you're gonna find that in the aircraft, it's gonna be changed, and that's where you find your weight and balance. Okay, so this is ARROW, Airworthiness Certificate, Registration, Radio License, Operator's Manual, and then the weight and balance, okay? So let's go ahead now and let's discuss now your airworthiness, okay? And when we talk about airworthiness, we are going to use a new acronym. So let's use a new color. Okay. And that new acronym is aviated. A-V, 1 for I, A, T, E, and D. So aviated. Okay. And the first one we talk about in aviated, and this is all connected to that annual, right? The airworthiness certificate. So this is all connected to airworthiness. The airworthiness certificate is good as long as we complete these following inspections. And the first one is the annual inspection. Okay. And the annual inspection is done every 12 calendar months. Okay. And when we talk about this, this is any reciprocating engine or single engine turbojet or turbo propeller powered small aircraft. These are aircraft that are weighing less than 12,500 pounds or less. And so that's what we're classifying as aircraft that are in need of an annual inspection. Other aircraft are obviously utilize annual inspections, but this is very specific. And we could find these specifics in FAR 91-409. And this inspection is going to be done every year. And this is going to be done by an AMP with a special endorsement by an inspector authorization. So an IA, inspector authorization. You're going to actually find that in the documentation in the logs. You'll see specifically underneath that annual, and then you'll have the endorsement by the airframe power plant mechanic. And right next to that, you'll see the initials IA, and that is inspector authorization. And so that's very specific. During that annual inspection, they're going to do some things like they're going to go through the airworthiness directives. We're going to talk about airworthiness directives in just a minute. They're going to go through any discrepancies. And one thing important to realize is that an annual inspection can be in place of a 100-hour inspection. Okay, so that 100-hour inspection, if you have a 100-hour inspection coming up and you end up doing an annual, then that 100-hour inspection, you can consider that 100-hour inspection being completed as well. So that's kind of nice, right? So the next thing we're going to talk about is VOR. V is for VOR, okay, or very high omnidirectional range, very high frequency omnidirectional range. This has to be done every 30 days. Okay, every 30 days, and this is for IFR operations. I'm going to put a little asterisk right there, and that's for IFR operations, right? It's 30 days. You're going to go fly out to or taxi over to a VOT, set the heading, and you're going to identify whether or not the CDI needle is centered and how many degrees off is off. So this is something you would worry about when you are an instrument-rated aircraft, instrument-rated pilot. The I, which is 1, right? We've made it I, but it's actually 1. That's for your 100-hour inspection, okay? So that's your 100-hour inspection. Every 100 hours, you need to complete this inspection, okay? And this is for aircraft that carry passengers for hire or use of flight instruction, okay? So this is any aircraft that's used for hire or for flight instruction. So that is how we take care of this inspection. This can be done by an airframe and power plant mechanic. Okay, so it doesn't need to have an IA. And you can go extend by plus 10 hours, but those 10 hours you are en route to a location in order to get this work done. So you're en route to get this work done. And but that has to be added to the next 100-hour inspection. So you don't get bonus hours. There's no bonus hours in 100-hour inspections, okay? The next one is A, and that would be your static system or your altimeter, right? A is for, let me move this down this way a little bit. Altimeter, and that's your static system. Okay. That's your static system, and this is to be done every 24 calendar months. Once again, this is for IFR operations, so I'm going to put a little asterisk right there. It's a great idea. It's good to have this being done anyways, and we can find this under 91. Where do we find this under? 91-411, okay? And it's good to have this done regardless. But this is specifically, it's more specific for IFR operations. If your aircraft is IFR approved, then you absolutely have to have this done. So this is your static system, your altimeter system. The next thing that we're going to talk about is your transponder. And so your transponder needs to be done whether you are IFR or VFR. And that's 24 calendar months as well. 24 calendar months. Okay. And if you notice, the altimeter, static system, and the transponder are both 24 calendar months. They typically are going to inspect these two together. Okay, they're going to do these two together because they're related, right? The transponder is capable of reading its altitude to the radar receiver. So it's important. Those two are going to be combined. The next one is E for ELT, and that is your emergency locator transmitter. It's every 12 months. Okay, so this is going to be done during your annual inspection. It's also half the battery life. It's going to need to be replaced, or 1 hour. 1 hour of cumulative use. 1 hour cumulative use. And where do we find this? We are going to find this in 91-207 Charlie Delta. Okay, so you can look a little bit further into that. If you want to look a little bit further into ELT, you can go into that reg and find it. Now, there is a special situation with ELTs. And the special situation is that when training operations, when you're doing flight training, you do not have to have an ELT as long as you stay within 50 nautical miles of the departure airport. Right? Stay at 50 nautical miles of departure airport, you're doing flight training, and you're allowed to do that. So that's interesting. And the last one final one is D. I'm going to move it forward because we're going to put an A in front of it. And that is your AD, or airworthiness directives, right? And your airworthiness directives are regulatory in nature, and compliance is mandatory. Mandatory. This is not something that you get to choose. This is a mandatory situation. How do we get ADs? Well, the owner and operator of the aircraft, it will be notified via FAA notification, and they are going to come in 3 forms. The first one is going to come in as one time. And that one time addresses an unsafe condition with a single corrective action. So you have a single corrective action. This is such as specific modifications or replacements that need to be done for that specific aircraft, okay? The next one is going to be reoccurring. Okay. And this reoccurring is something that has to be done periodically during inspection. So one of the most common ones we see when we talk about training aircraft is the Cessna 172 seat rail. This is to be inspected every 100 hours. And that 100-hour seat rail inspection cannot be overflown by an airworthiness directive. The next one is an emergency. Okay. And the emergency compliance prior to further flights. So it has to be done prior to any additional flights. So that airplane is grounded until that AD is met prior to any additional flights. So this is very serious, right? Something that was identified and is super duper serious. Has to be taken care of pretty close to, it's got to be taken care of right away. Okay, so those are all the inspections that need to be done in order to maintain your airworthiness. Right? In order to maintain your airworthiness. So your airworthiness comes up, and when you talk about airworthiness certificate, well, these are the inspections that must be done in order to maintain that airworthiness certificate. As long as these airworthiness certificates are done, then great. Now, where do we find these, right? Where do we find the airworthiness certificate and the registration? Well, we're going to find that in the airplane. It has to be placarded in the aircraft somewhere, right? Down below, on the side, somewhere. And it's usually down below, in a training aircraft, it's usually down below on the side wall of the aircraft, towards your feet, actually, towards the rudder pedals. Okay, so let's move on. Now, we come out to the airplane. Let's get a new color. Right? We come out to the airplane, and when we come out to the airplane, we have identified that there is something missing, something wrong with that aircraft, right? Maybe there's a component that's not working or an operative instrument or equipment, right? So how do we address that? Well, let's go ahead and address that. And the regulation we're going to look under is 91.213. And this is for inoperative instruments and equipment. Okay. Inoperative instruments and equipment. Okay. And when we first look at this, the first thing we're going to look at is 91 as we work our way down this regulation. As we work our way down this regulation, and you can follow along by opening up your regs, 91.213, Alpha through Charlie. And this discusses an MEL, minimum equipment list. And this discusses an MEL. And when we look at the MEL, what is an MEL and what is not, what do we not have? Well, generally speaking, an MEL is for large aircraft, air carriers, right? And an MEL must be requested from the FAA, okay? This is usually for large air carriers that operate like, charter flights or like any big airline is going to be operating with an MEL. And that's because there's so many components on that airplane. They have to identify that if that component isn't working, they can continue to fly without that component being operational. So that's really why they have that. Now, is a Cessna 172 going to have an MEL? Most likely not, right? So let's work our way down the regulation of 91.213. And when we work our way down, we're now going to get to 91.213 Delta, which is how do we operate without. So no MEL. So how do we operate with no MEL? Well, we're going to go into section 2, right? We're going to go into section 2, and we're going to go down to section I. And we go into that section, we're going to find our type, certificate, data sheet, okay? And when we find that type certificate data sheet, and it's a wordy regulation, okay? But when we talk about that type certificate data sheet, we can pull up a type certificate data sheet, and I've pulled one up for Cessna 172 Lima, and that's going to have a lot of different things about the type of different propellers you can use, and it's going to have limitations in regards to the course of travel for the ailerons, and it's going to have airspeed and fuel tank capacities. But it's generally speaking not going to be real specific on what you can and cannot fly with. Like I said, it's not going to be a document that's going to be real too helpful in regards to an inoperative instrument or equipment. It's more or less what can you use on that aircraft other than what has been provided by the manufacturer. So your type certificate data sheet is not going to be too helpful in this situation. So we're going to work our way down, and we're going to go into the kinds of operation equipment list. And when we go into the kinds of operation equipment list, our new Cessna 172s that are current, not the ones that were built in the 70s, but the newer ones, they have great kinds of operation equipment list in the Pilot Operating Handbook, the POH. And you're going to find that in section number 2 of your POH. So you could open up that, that 172 mic kinds of operation list. You're going to find a really nice list of all the equipment that can be used and can't be used. And what is it when we say kinds of operation? Well, it's specifically that. It's the kind of operation. VFR, day, VFR, night, IFR, day, IFR, night. It's going to be split up in these sections, and it's going to be very specific on certain items, that instruments or equipment that can be inoperative and yet still used. The other section we're going to look at is a comprehensive equipment list, okay? And that you're going to find in POH section 6. And you're going to find that in POH section 6, and that is your comprehensive equipment list. Once again, it's going to be really nice because it's going to be back behind the weight and balance. You're going to have a lot of equipment there that you're going to be able to find and identify whether or not it could be utilized or not. Okay. And then the last thing you're going to look at is your supplemental. Your supplement. And your supplement list is going to be in the very back of your POH, and that's going to be in section number 9. And these are things like, with Civil Air Patrol, they have these airplanes that have all these fancy radios, and then they have, extra equipment that they've swapped out because they need extra different types of equipment, or maybe that airplane has switched from a steam gauge over to a glass cockpit. So what's those new items, and they need to have that that supplemental information in place. So that'll be in the supplemental. Okay. So let's work our way down. Let's say we still haven't found anything that is viable or informative for us for this specific flight. So we're going to go down to the next section, IV, and we're going to look in our ADs, our airworthiness directives. Okay. And once again, you have the one-time, reoccurring, and emergency airworthiness directives. The other thing that is going to be along with that is service bulletins. Now, a service bulletin is going to be provided through the manufacturer, and that manufacturer is going to issue a service bulletin. They are not regulatory in nature. They are not mandatory, but obviously it's advantageous to you if you maintain that aircraft as the manufacturer sees fit. So if they see something that needs to be addressed, that manufacturer will issue that. But it's not coming from the FAA, it's coming from the manufacturer. Working our way down. Okay, let's work our way down. Actually, oh gosh, I missed something. Sorry about that. Can't believe I totally missed it. So we're gonna go, let's do this. I totally missed it, but that's okay. We can go back, and the magic of an eraser. And we totally forgot I-3. Went right on past 3. And when we go to 3, it's 91-205. And 91-205 is going to be your A. Let's do it in red. A tomato flames. Okay, and we know A tomato flames adamantly, right? We've talked about A tomato flames before. These are things like your airspeed indicator, your tachometer, oil pressure, oil temperature, your manifold pressure, right? Your fuel gauge, landing gear, position indicator. So all of those things in the A tomato flames of 91-205 are items that will come up in that regulation. So we have to make sure that we maintain those items. All right, and we already talked about, let's go back to AD. I wanted to get to AD so badly that I missed something. Let's go ahead and erase this real quick. All right, now we go back to ADs and airworthiness directives, ADs, and service bulletins. We already talked about this now, right? Bulletins. Got ahead of myself. All right, so 91-205, then ADs, right? Now, let's go ahead and talk about what we do when we find something, okay? What do we do when we find something that needs to be replaced, right? Or needs to be, we can still fly with this item, this inoperative instrument or equipment. We can still fly with it, but, what do we do with it now, right? So we go to work our way down to section 3 of our regulation, okay? Instruments and equipment required specific operations by this part. And when we talk about this, what are we going to do? Okay, so specifically, we're going to remove it, repair. We're going to remove it, repair it, or we're going to placard it, inoperative, okay, or disconnect it, right? Okay. Remove it, repair it, replace it or repair it, replace a placard that states that it is inoperative, okay? And then the other thing we got to do is we want to log the item, log it. Log the item, right? And that could be logged in regards to the logbook and a squawk, right? A squawk that is going to be logged and provided information to other individuals that are flying that airplane. Okay, let's work our way down. Here's the last item. This is the most important one, is PIC. Is it safe? Right? Even if this item is inoperative and the instrument or equipment is not on any of the list, and you can fly this aircraft with this inoperative equipment, is it safe to fly the airplane? You as a PIC have the ultimate say in regards to whether or not that item is safe, okay? Whether or not that item is safe. So, all right. So, and that would be under 91.213 D, and that's 4, okay? So 91.213 D4, and so, and then the other one above that, which is deactivate placard, inoperative, or completely remove. That's under 91.213 D3. So we kind of went through that already. So D3, right? All right. So let's talk about one more thing. Actually, we're going to talk about two more things. Okay. The first thing we're going to talk about when we come back to this way is who can do maintenance, right? Who can do maintenance? Let's get another color. Let's go with green. So who can do maintenance, right? So maintenance can be done by the owner or operator. And these are simple items. Simple items. Such as, right? Such as oil changes and tires, right? Things that are very simple. They're not complex, okay? And we can find this under 91 FAR 91407. Okay, so 91407 is going to give us the information regarding preventative maintenance. Okay, preventative maintenance. Record keeping. Okay, so in record keeping, you're going to want to find that in 91417, right? And these records need to be maintained. Okay, and we need to make sure we maintain that information and documentation, right? And this is all going to be transferred with an aircraft, whether it goes to a new owner or not. It's going to be transferred. So we want to make sure we have all of this information, logbooks and things like that set up to ensure that we have proper documentation. The last thing we're going to talk about, the very last thing, is going to be a airworthiness, ferry certificate, right? So obtaining a special flight permit, right? Special flight permit. And we're going to find this under FAR 21197, okay? And so what is a special flight permit? Well, let's say that we flew to Cable Airport, it's out in the middle of nowhere. Let's say we're farther, Desert Center, right? We fill out Desert Center, the fuel gauge, we get back in the airplane after going camping or something, and the fuel gauge is not working, right? We have the fuel topped off, but it's still reading 0. So we've identified that the fuel gauge is not working. Well, based on tomato flames, we technically can't fly it. So we contact the Flight Standard District Office. Right? And we say, hey, we're out here at Desert Center. We need to get the aircraft back to Long Beach for maintenance. Our fuel gauge is not operational. Can we get a special flight permit to get this aircraft back to maintenance? We're out in Desert Center. There's nothing out here but desert, right? So what happens there is they approve this information. They approve it based on a specific status, right? We're going to fly in VFR. When we fly in VFR, then it's going to be, we can fly it to the location that we have identified, and we're going to fill the tanks up. And so this is stipulation, and they go over that stipulation and they approve it. And now we are able to operate that aircraft back to Long Beach based on that approval. So that's what a special flight permit is. It's issued by a airworthiness representative, and they will then determine whether or not that's allowed. And once they are, we can go ahead and bring that back. Okay, good. So just real quick, just some things, some scenarios. Let's say that we have a stall warning horn Okay, or maybe a landing light. And then the last scenario would be an attitude indicator. So based on your aircraft, I'd like for you to go and find whether or not those would be allowed, or you'd be allowed to operate with that. And then if you are allowed to operate, what are you gonna do with it? And how are you gonna follow through with that? So that is our section. This is everything you need to know regarding your airworthiness, okay? All of your airworthiness information, whether or not that aircraft is airworthy, and then if something is broken, how do you manage that? So hope you enjoyed this lesson.